Episode 8. Big Nipples. It has been said by better people than me. Alright, I know that doesn't narrow the field much, that we British are very good at snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. You can tell that we find it hard to identify successes worth celebrating simply by looking at the age of the examples given by participants in a recent opinion poll. Researchers from NotMeGov interviewed a cross-section of the UK population about what they thought were the top 3 candidates for our country's finest art. No wonder they were cross at being asked such a stupid question. Having worked for years in my day job on interpreting statistics based on surveys, I now have quite a few examples of man's inanity to man, stored in a folder on originally labeled, broken down by sex and age. For instance, the one about our aging population, which asked young people for their attitude to the growing number of centurions, and the finding from a poll on loneliness in later life that 49% of older people will be spending Christmas in the minority. Anyway, the survey, Our Iconic Hours, provided the newspaper which had commissioned it with plenty of material. They came up with several headline stats confirming our superiority over Johnny Foreigner. The pollsters had added to the online version a link to the full data tables. This could be seen as a contribution to open data sharing, but was probably what we in the trade call a mistake. This meant that I could do my own spurious number crunching, and I came up with the following statistic. The younger half of the adult population, defined here as aged 18 to 45, named their top 3 British successes as winning the World Cup, Dunkirk, the Blitz. This was based on a representative sample of the UK, so there is always going to be a bias towards England. I doubt many Scots voted for England's World Cup victory in 1966, but my point here is not about the Scots, it's about the dates. The only things the majority of younger Brits could agree on happened before they were even born. Put another, rather unprofessional way, they couldn't think of anything worth celebrating in their own lifetimes. This cross-section of our population failed to highlight the wonderful achievements of the 2012 Olympic Games, and hardly managed to mention a single politician, with Momo Lum and the Northern Ireland Peace Accord gaining less than 5% of the survey vote. And I know why. The problem with our leaders is that they are either too grey or too Marmite. First, let's look at the biggest blips on our radar. John Major is a good example of someone who rose without trace, becoming Prime Minister for no apparent reason except being the least worst option. On his meteoric rise to becoming the nation's punchbag, the one shade of grey Major had made few enemies, something he managed to remedy as soon as he became Prime Minister, and he was not the only one. The Labour Party managed to avoid this problem by choosing a string of unelectable leaders, but their Conservative counterparts were less coy about seizing power with both hands and stepping into the quagmire with both feet. If Harold Macmillan were alive today, he'd be turning in his grave. Just look at the last 2 contestants on I'm a Mediocrity, Get Me Into Here. Theresa May is probably a perfectly nice person, but she should never have been allowed anywhere near power. She could have written her resignation speech on the first day in her new job, but instead she clung on like grim death to every bit of flotsam bobbing around 10 Downing Street. And then there's our beloved Boris, overeducated, oversexed and overwhelmed, a bear of very little brain but lots of sharp claws. He does speak Latin, and I'm sure that, if he had been around at the time, he would have been the first to give Julius Caesar a ventilated toga. Someone must have appointed Chris Grayling as Transport Secretary, presumably on the basis that he occasionally went places, and not always on foot. The Tory backbencher recently made a speech in which he defended government from conspiracy theories by saying that they weren't competent enough to mount a decent conspiracy, and that details would have been leaked to the press in a matter of days. As Yes Prime Minister puts it, the ship of state is the only ship that leaks from the top, and we mustn't forget Marmite Margaret Thatcher. Loathe her or hate her, you couldn't ignore her. Actually, a surprising number of people adored her. Mind you, Mussolini was popular because he made the trains run on time, but none of Maggie's achievements got into the iconic moments list because, to this day, she continues to divide opinion. There are many still alive, or in the House of Lords, who vehemently object to everything she stood for. They even oppose giving her a state funeral, which I think is rather vindictive. Personally, I had no objection, but I thought it was 50 years too late, so there you have it, and a pretty sorry tale it is too, a country living off the scraps of former glory, and yet, we are courteous to strangers after all. They can't help being foreign, and we rarely complain, at least in public. But when things start to go pear-shaped, we come into our own. This sweeping generalization is not a case of national stereotyping. Well, okay, it is a bit. It is hard to say anything meaningful that covers all 67 million of us. At times, it seems that we can't agree on anything, but we need to make judgments, and the assertion that the British react well to adversity is based on a great deal of historical evidence, by and large, in the main, and this goes for all of us, regardless of ethnicity, skin tone, shoe size and so on. To quote a well-known philosopher and president, I don't have a racist bone in my body. Wrong, dong. It's only the bones in your head that count. And after 4 years of stream of consciousness presidency, we have a pretty good idea what it looks like in there. Making the most of a bad situation really is part of being British. We are armed and ready for when King Cock-up comes calling. Having lived in Germany, I can confirm that this is not the case everywhere. People there try hard to get things right, and they expect the same of others. Their reaction to failure is naturally negative and practical. Find out who's to blame and get them to fix it. The Americans have a similar attitude to people who fail them, but with the added option of suing their ass off. In many other countries, the attitude to human frailty, corruption and catastrophe is one of quiet resignation, occasionally punctuated by bloody retribution. So when we were all jolted out of sleep by an explosion and a shockingly wet feeling, a sensation we may not have experienced since early childhood, and hopefully won't again for a few years yet, we were instantly in action ready. Don't panic, Mr. Mannering mode. It may have been 3 o'clock in the morning when the plumbing tsunami struck. We might initially have been unsure of where we were and what the hell we were doing there, but we all swung out of our beds and planted our feet shin deep in freezing cold water. Jackson Hole, we all exclaimed, for that was precisely where we were. I thought I had done really well getting the top floor of a ski chalet out of season. I know it's a long way from Yellowstone National Park. Well, okay, it's more than 100 miles from some of the things we want to see, but the lodges in the park are booked up years in advance, and this is the closest I could get. How was I to know that the water pipes were held together by a string and a prayer? You could easily argue that these inconveniences amount to a catastrophe, especially when I have to admit that all we have for breakfast at this ungodly hour are a couple of energy bars and some milk that is past its smell by date. Incidentally, It's one of the joys of being in the Nil by Mouth Club that I no longer have a dairy allergy. As long as we have a plentiful supply of soy feed to pump straight into my stomach, I am free from the shackles of having to explain that I can't eat this but I can eat the other, that eggs are not dairy. Have you ever tried to milk a chicken? Or eat a cow's egg? That I am not intolerant of anything except people who don't believe me when I tell them I have an allergy and then try to correct my English. That I am not lactose intolerant, that I could have a ton of lactose and still be on my feet, that dairy produce blights many Cornish pasties, sausages and cheap ham. That's the inexpensive stuff, not ham made from chickens. Also, that if they are not sure, they are welcome to serve it to me anyway, so long as I can stick around for a week to give them a full multi-sensory experience of what allergic means to me. Not that I'm bitter, of course, that would not be British, and, as everybody knows, nothing is more British than a second-generation POM. I am not complaining, really I'm not. But I think it's only fair that you spend a minute now focusing on your hunger and imagining what it would be like to know that you will never ever eat again. That is my manipulative way of saying sorry for messing up the food supplies. Never mind, you're bound to find a place later that serves burgers the size of Joseph Merrick's head. I'm not trying to put you off your food, but I have a feeling you will forget about it anyway. You will soon forget your clothes are wet, that you're sleep deprived and it's 28 degrees outside. Fahrenheit, that is, not Celsius, at 5 o'clock on what is going to be a beautiful sunny morning. It's only a relatively short drive to our first adventure of the day, and in no time at all, you have spotted the gatekeepers to the enchanted world of the Grand Teton National Park, 100 or so shaggy beasts that look like cows on steroids, but are in fact buffalo, or rather not, they are bison. I'm afraid the pioneers of the Wild West were better at making things extinct than they were at naming them, although you can see that this species is now staging a comeback. Further proof of cowboys or trappers' woeful way with words is becoming visible behind our munching friends. If you have ever seen a mountain range more beautiful than this one, please tell me now. Not the biggest or the highest, but a stunning group of gently pointed peaks gathered round the dominant central mountain, the kind of scene drawn by a child, and what did the pioneers call it? The Grand Teton, the big nipple. They had either been away from female company for too long, or someone had serious mother issues. Either way, these snowy peaks deserve a better name. Before you set off on your 2-hour hike, let's cross the river on this wooden bridge and stop at the top of the lake by a bench and the inevitable safety warning sign. I am fascinated by these border areas where true wilderness and American risk-averse culture meet. Most of the 1,000 or so words on the notice board can be boiled down to 4 words. You have been warned. However, there are 2 sections you ought to pay attention to. Firstly, bears. At this time of the year, there is not a cat in hell's chance of seeing any unassigned neighbors at these altitudes. But it's good stuff all the same. In short, it says, bears are always hungry, they have a good sense of smell and sharp claws, they have poor eyesight, bears can be cranky if there are cubs around or if you wake them up from hibernation. That squash you flat and tear you to pieces cranky. If you do encounter one, make yourself appear as small as you can. If all else fails, throw your packed lunch in one direction and run in the other. Bears run faster than humans. In this terrain Usain Bolt would be toast and I would be Meals on Wheels, which reminds me of Matt LeBlanc, who is not a kind of pain but my favorite presenter of the TV motoring show Top Gear. In a scene not even remotely connected with cars, we see Matt and his colleague Chris Harris running through the woods because they are afraid that there might be bears around. You do know, pants Chris, that we cannot possibly outrun a bear. I don't have to run faster than the bear, beams Matt. I just need to run faster than you. The sign here also warns us about mountain lions. In a nutshell, the advice is to wave your arms above your head and advance confidently toward the beast in an effort to intimidate it. So if you hear rustling in the undergrowth, be prepared to appear small and insignificant if a bear steps out onto the path, or to make yourself big and threatening if it turns out to be a mountain lion. Above all, don't get the two mixed up, and remember, fear is just nature's laxative. But if, as I'd expect, the only big animals you see are a herd of moose sitting and ruminating in a sunny meadow, you're not even going to be licked to death. And as for the forest's more dangerous inhabitants, the best advice of all is to talk incessantly in a loud voice, something the locals seem to have no trouble at all with. Did I mention snakes? No, seriously, take your time and enjoy this amazing walk, make some memories, and I'll see you back at the van about 10 o'clock. Go as slow as you like. There will still be plenty of morning left for the next stage of our adventure. The day which started with a plumbing explosion and a soggy awakening is turning into, well, I'll let you make up your own minds about that, but I bet you any money that there won't be any thoughts of stiff upper lips, British steadfastness in the face of adversity, or the Dunkirk spirit. I know I have quoted John Major before, but indulge me please. The Grey One said of us Brits that, when we've got our backs to the wall, we turn round and fight. Perhaps we should stop pummeling the plaster for a while, turn back to face the day and be more like our American hosts, loud and proud.